Alright, what is up guys? Alex here. I wanted to do a little video just for fun, breaking down my thoughts on the most recent experimental patch notes on Overwatch as of August 6th, on kind of how I view each of them. So, first off, we've got changes to Brig. Her base health is lowered from 200 to 150. I'm okay with this change. And the only reason I say that is it just creates some more consistency among support characters, them all being 200 HP. But the next thing we're going to talk about, I definitely don't agree with, is Inspire. The total healing decrease from 130 to 90, so that's your health per second ends up going down to 15 from 21. I don't think Brig's healing is an issue at all, honestly. She's not a great healer as is. Really, Brig's main use in the game right now is just kind of like a CC tool. She's essentially an off healer. Her main purpose is to sort of peel for the backline and help defend your other support character. And I don't really think her healing needed to be tweaked at all, to be honest. I think she's probably the worst healer in the game when it comes to raw healing. Next to like Zen. Zen probably heals less, but you know, Brig's not exactly great at healing stuff, so I just don't really, I don't know. There's so much burst in the game these days with the power creep that I don't really agree with Brig healing being nerfed. Although self-healing is no longer reduced by half. So, your Inspire self-healing is going to be a little faster now. But that's really the only buff, whereas you see these two nerfs. I would have been okay if they changed this and they added this to compensate. Instead, they nerf her healing, which I think is going to kill the character completely. There's going to be no reason to play her. And I get Brig is really easy to play. She doesn't really take any sort of brain power or skill, but I mean, it's kind of a bummer if the character's in the game and it just has no purpose, so it kind of just sits there and collects dust. I mean, it's kind of like, what's the point? I don't know, I don't really agree with this change in particular. I think this is a pretty terrible change from Blizzard. Next up, Orisa. Base armor reduced from 250 to 200, so it's going back to what it was before they buffed it. So 200 HP, 200 armor, 400 total HP. I guess I'm okay with this to some extent. I mean, Orisa did have way more armor than the other two main tanks, which I believe Ryan and Winston both only have 100 armor, whereas she had 250, which was just way more, which allowed her to be overall more durable, even though she had less maximum health. You know, I guess Winston, you could say if he uses his ultimate, he's maybe more durable in some instances if he uses his ult to bail himself out of a bad situation, but I'm okay with this. Halt radius reduced from 7 to 4 meters, so yeah, that's a big change. So Halt's not going to be able to grab you from as far away. You know, Halt right now is a little annoying. I think it is a little too easy to land consistently on targets. I don't think you have to be that close. So most likely I'm okay with this. Projectile speed increased from 20 to 30. So it is going to come out a bit quicker, which I'm not sure if that's really going to help. I don't know if that's intended to be a buff, because if it's a buff, I'm not sure that makes it easier to use. If it's quicker, that means you have to time it better, because otherwise it'll go past the target that you're intending to hit. Although it probably still won't be that hard to land, but you know, I'm okay with most of these changes to Orisa, although I would say if they're going to do these kind of nerfs, I would have at least given Orisa something to compensate. I don't think Orisa needs to be buffed by any stretch. She is probably the best main tank overall right now. She's pretty low risk. She's not very hard to play, and she's pretty steady at what she does. And she doesn't really suffer to CC that badly. But, you know, what I think arguably what I would like to see is, you know, if they're going to nerf her in these ways, maybe just slightly buff her shield. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. I know people hate shields. I get it. But right now I think the cooldown is 10 seconds, and the health on the shield is only 600 HP. So I think that's actually less than every other shield in the game besides like Brig's shield. Although the funny thing is Brig's shield used to be 600, which was insane. But you know, maybe just buff the HP from the shield from like, I don't know, 600 to 700, so it's the same as Winston's or something. I don't know, something small like that. It just makes me feel like Orisa is kind of just going to fall out of the meta completely. Maybe she won't be a throw pick necessarily, but I think we're going to see just a shift in general. And I think that's the biggest issue with Blizzard, is they typically just, their patches, they just cause meta shifts. They don't typically make multiple things viable at once. It's more of they just kind of overbuff something, and then they sort of beat it into the ground again. And then, you know, that's kind of how the game changes. It just, the meta shifts from one thing to the next, instead of the game having a meta where there's just numerous things. And obviously, I know people are annoyed at the barrier meta as it is right now, but I think there's other underlying reasons as to why the barrier meta is so prevalent on the current state of the game. But Pharah, hover jets, movement speed increased by 20%. I'm fine with this. Hit scans are really good right now. You know, Ashe especially is really strong. So I don't really have a big deal with that. Regen rate reduced from 50 to 35, so technically it's not going to regen as fast, but I think the movement speed overall is going to compensate for it. So I think that evens out. And then Barrage, duration reduced from 3 to 2.5 seconds. So in theory, this is a nerf, but it might mean the difference. Now, obviously, I think in that half second you can get an extra kill. It does enough damage to do that. But I think often the issue is when you use Pharah ult is you're going to die. You're pretty much guaranteed to die unless you have somebody actively pocketing you when you ult, or you have just something else on you to keep you from taking damage. Because you are so easy to hit, you're just essentially hovering in the air, and typically people just focus you as soon as you use the ult. So, you know, you typically don't live. Now, the question is, will this difference in Barrage allow more Pharah players to survive the Barrage? Because I think if that is the case, that is definitely a buff. Even if you get one less kill, if you can survive the Barrage, that allows you to stay in the fight and continue dumping damage down. You continue to be able to utilize this buff to its advantage. You know, so I think these buffs are fine. Roadhog, scrap gun in general, ammo reduced from 6 to 5. So going back to what it was previously in the past. Damage per projectile increased from 6 to 7. So what this does is essentially every pellet in the shotgun blast does 1 more damage. So I think now you're going to be able to actually one-shot with the hook combo. You should be able to one-shot 250 HP characters now if you hit the entire combo. So that's going to definitely make Roadhog more lethal against some characters. He's not going to be one-shotting tank characters like he used to a long time ago, but definitely makes him a bit more consistent in the damage department, and it kind of just allows him to break shields faster, which is, again, another reason why I'm kind of hesitant. We're going to look at Sigma's changes here in a second, but that's why I'm hesitant to nerf shields so much when you're buffing, you know, Roadhog, Pharah, and then you're also buffing, we'll look at Zen's changes a little bit later, but, and Sim, by the way, so, I don't know. Recovery increased from 0.7 to 0.85, so that's rate of fire essentially. So it does shoot a bit slower, but the damage per pellet's going to allow him to be more consistent with the hook combo. I think he'd probably still be able to one-shot Brigitte on live with this change. before Brigida gets nerfed. Now Brig's going to be one-shotted by Roadhog probably just about every time she gets hooked. Alright, Sigma, and this is probably, to me, the Sigma changes, I would say, are probably my least favorite in the entire patch, next to, like, I don't know, Brig and maybe, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of the Pharah, well, not the Pharah, sorry, the Orisa changes, but, Sigma's health on his barrier is reduced from 900 to 700, regen rate 120 to 80, so this significantly hurts. I think damage in its current state is able to break barriers okay. Now, obviously, when you have double barrier, it's a little harder to break. But again, Orisa and Sigma are the type of characters, they kind of rely on each other, I find. So nerfing Sigma is kind of like nerfing Orisa. So nerfing both of these characters at the same time is kind of weird to me. I would say nerf one or the other. Nerfing both, just nerf shields overall. Like, that kind of just nerfs shields, and then you're also buffing other characters that can break shields, you know, like the Symmetra, the Zen changes, Pharah, Roadhog. I get they don't want a double shield meta, but the issue is if shields are completely, just aren't able to really provide any sort of, you know, protection, really, and they break so often, I mean, does that really... I mean, that encourages, I would say, defensive bunker-style compositions heavily, honestly. I think that creates more of a defender's advantage, and I'm not sure if that's super fun when it comes to gameplay, but... the other thing, Kinetic Grasp, cooldown increased. I mean, it's a good ability. I mean, I definitely disagree with this change without a doubt. I think this does not need to change. This change I'm kind of iffy on. I don't know if I like it that much. It's not as bad as this change, though. The thing is, to me, if they were going to touch Sigma, to me it would have just been his damage. That would have been the only reason to nerf him, honestly, at all. Would have been damage-wise, but they're just nerfing the wrong thing again, and I just don't think they're understanding why Sigma is too good as is. Or not even too good. Like, Sigma, again, I think is a product of the meta. I think he is played a lot because he pairs well with Orisa, who's, I think, right now, overall the best main tank. I think it's kind of, it's just sort of like that. It's a combo thing. The two characters pair well together, so people kind of play them in unison. I don't know. Symmetra, Photon Projector, Primary Fire, delay before losing charge increased from 2 to 4 seconds. So this is actually kind of nuts. I know Sim isn't really amazing right now, but delay before losing charge is now 4 seconds. That allows you to keep max charge on your Photon Projector, which actually does pretty good damage at max charge. It will kill people pretty fast. It's sort of like being heavily charged on Zarya. And you can also obviously use that to melt shields, and you can also charge your weapon on shields. So this is just another buff that just really, really shreds shields. If the Roadhog buffs already weren't enough to nuke shields, you know, they kind of lump this on top of it, and they also make Teleporter 10 seconds from 12. I don't really have an issue with Teleporter here, but, you know, Symmetra buff, maybe make it 3 seconds instead of 4. I don't know. I feel like you're just really making shield break just ridiculous. Especially because you're nerfing. I mean, I wouldn't have as big of a deal with this Photon change if they weren't nerfing Sigma's shield. You know, I don't know. Or if they were going to nerf Sigma's shield, at least, I don't know, buff Orisa to compensate slightly, or like give Orisa a buff, I would say. No, don't buff Orisa, but but just give her a small buff here that can kind of, you know, it's not going to fully counteract these changes, but it will at least prevent her from becoming, you know, significantly weaker. So again, I'm okay with the teleporter change, but I don't know if I really agree with the photon projector. Zenyatta, Orb of Destruction, secondary fire. The charge rate's been increased, so it does take less time to charge orbs, and the rate of fire has been increased from 8.5 to 9 shots. I do actually like the Zen buff. He's kind of in a weird state right now where I do think he does good damage, but he's just so... He's probably the worst healer in the game, so it feels like when you play him, you're kind of relying on solo healing, and it's risky. You have to play like a very specific style. And like I said, I actually really like these buffs, actually. I think they're good. I don't think Zen's that strong in his current state, and I would like to actually see him a little bit more prevalent as he is. Or a little bit more reason to play him, at least, to some extent. But again, they buff him and they nerf shields, which I just... Doing both of them, I think you have to pick one or the other, you know? I think you either nerf shields and you don't buff some of these characters, or you buff some of these characters but you don't nerf shields. I think, unfortunately, doing both of them just kind of is going to cause a big meta shift, and the game's just going to not... I don't think it's going to play as well. We're going to have less healing overall. We're going to have shields being broken much quicker, which I think is the game's going to turn into... I mean, there's going to be much more of a reliance on some of the stronger healers to do a lot of work. And I think, if anything, it's probably going to make the support meta a little less interesting. And the thing is, you know, Zen may not even be played simply because if damage is really, really good in general, if damage and, you know, Roadhog and, you know, if shield break is really, really strong, people aren't going to want to play Zenyatta if it proves to be a liability in the healing department, where, like, if they're just breaking your shield so fast, that means they're putting damage on you, and if Zen's not able to heal enough stuff, you know, I don't know, maybe the meta will become a glass cannon meta where, you know, Zen is important and you kind of just try to out-damage the other team. But to me, that's kind of more of a spam sort of thing, where both sides just sort of spam shields to kill them fast. There's not really a whole lot of tactical play. And it's like both teams crutching. I mean, who knows? Maybe nerfing shields will just result in double shield being even more prominent. I don't know. You know, and by double shield, I mean like heavier shields becoming more prominent. Like, who knows? Maybe people will start playing... I don't think double main tank is going to become a thing, per se. But there's a slight possibility it happens. Or maybe... you see, like, Reinhardt, Sigma, or something. I don't know, some weird composition like that come out. You know, maybe people just start playing, like, heavier shields to try and deal with the extra damage that's been, you know, buffed, essentially. And I'm not against it. I'm not against the Zen buffs. I'm not against the Roadhog buffs. I'm not against the Pharah buffs. You know, I actually think these characters are all characters that are struggling in the current state of the game. Even Symmetra a little to some extent, although I think Sim you got to be careful with because she's somebody that does a lot of damage, so you got to be careful. You don't want to overtune her too much. She's kind of like Bastion, where, like, she's niche, but you got to be careful because if you just give her way too much stuff, she could become just extremely cancerous. But, you know, if they're going to buff some of these characters, Sim, Zen, Roadhog, Pharah, I just don't understand why you're nerfing Sigma, why you're nerfing Brig, why you're... I mean, it's just... I don't know. It doesn't really make sense. It's kind of all over the place. I don't really agree with it, but... if you guys have any thoughts, feel free. Leave them in the comment section. If I had to rate this patch out of 10... with a 5 being an average score, I'd say it's probably a 4. Probably a 4. There's some good changes, but there's also quite a few bad changes. It's kind of a mixed bag. I'm not sure if it really makes the game better overall, but I I think when it comes to Blizzard, it doesn't really seem like they want to make the game better. It just seems like generally most of their updates, the goal is just to change the meta. It's not really to improve the meta per se or make the game more diverse and sort of how people play it and composition-wise. It's more of just to cause a general meta shift. And I think they're just so obsessed with shifting the meta constantly instead of, you know, actually having the game become more fun, which is sort of why we saw hero bans get removed completely from the game, because it was just causing a meta shift like every week, which, you know, was actually irritating because you couldn't really, you could sort of, you know, after a week, you could sort of figure out what the meta was, but then the meta, by the time you kind of started to get to hang of, you know, of what was viable and what was good, the game would just change again. And instead, I'd rather just have a meta where a lot of things are viable, and, you know, the meta is kind of based more on, you know, what point on what map you're playing, and people kind of switch their compositions, you know, based on that, and people understand, you know, map-wise which compositions are good in what situations and when to play them and stuff. So, you know, so the game relies more on basically game knowledge versus just knowing what the meta is and just playing that over and over again. But yeah, I'll stop jabbering on. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And I will see you guys on the next one. Adios, muchachos.